remind our viewers, and you know this is better than I do, that since that negotiation or agreement for a ceasefire negotiation framework between President Trump and President Zelensky, that Russia has attacked Ukraine, Kyiv, and other cities, 250 plus drone attacks, as well as several ballistic missile attacks. So I think you're going to see Putin on the offensive here as long as he can, in order to try to put him into the best position for those at least those 30-day ceasefire negotiations.
Do you see this air attacks on Ukraine after the beginning of negotiations between Ukraine, the United States, and Russia as an intimidation, as an insult from Vladimir Putin to Donald Trump?
I think, let me back up. I don't think Putin has stopped intimidating Ukraine or the West since he invaded back on February 24th of 2022. And fast forward to today, he'll take every tool out of his war chest, but also diplomatically, to try to intimidate President Trump and perhaps a unified front now between not only the United States and Ukraine, but also Europe. But Trump is going to stand his ground. He's going to make it a very tough, he'll maintain very tough positions in negotiating with Putin. They sound nice, if you will, across the ocean in terms of their pronouncements of the last couple days. But I think you're going to find President Trump maintaining a very tough stance from a military standpoint, sure, because he's now again providing Ukraine with minute-by-minute intelligence, but also has now continued with U.S. providing military support. We still have over $3 billion, Daniel, of military capabilities in the pipeline that we could provide Ukraine. I would also offer up that President Trump did away with the exemptions for European Union, as well as European nations, that allowed them to have oil and gas sales between themselves and Russia. They're no longer permitted to do that. My point being is, I think the biggest card that Trump has to play is the economic card, where now European Union and those European nations can no longer, from a sanction standpoint or an exemption to those sanctions, be able to do oil and gas deals with Putin and Russia. That will hurt Putin financially, and Trump knows that.
So you're confident that Vladimir Putin will try to gain as much as possible, as much Ukrainian land as possible, before he enters negotiations seriously?
I absolutely agree with that. And again, it goes back, and you and I talked about this last time, we cannot trust Putin. And therefore, the only thing Putin will understand as the attacker of Ukraine, but also the bully that we know him to be, is the only thing he understands is strength. And the only thing he understands is a united front between the United States, Ukraine, and the rest of Europe. That's what's really been remarkable since that tumultuous meeting in the Oval Office on February 28th to where we are right now. I see a much more unified position between the United States and Ukraine, as well as with Europe. Putin will understand that. But I think the thing that's really going to impact him and deter him or get him to the negotiating table, at least to be in the ceasefire negotiations at the beginning, are really the economic and financial challenges that his country is going to face in the coming months, and perhaps even over a year or two, faced with a strong U.S. position financially and economically vis-a-vis sanctioning Putin and Russia, especially with his oil and gas sales.
From your perspective, do you see this recent reaction, TV address from Vladimir Putin to Trump, reacting to this proposal as a no to this proposal, or do you see this as a rejection of Trump's proposal?
I see it as perhaps more on the rejection side. However, it's more to be determined. I think what Putin is trying to do is he's just trying to stall for a better position on the battlefield. Earlier this week, Daniel, we didn't see a Putin in a business suit, but we saw him in military fatigues. We saw him, that is sending a message to the rest of the world. He also, for the first time, visited the front lines, Russia's front lines in the Kursk region, and met with his theater commander. So he's trying to also own the optics of how he is to be viewed, not only internally in Russia, but externally. And so even something as maybe seen as simple as him being in military fatigues, I think would warrant us to consider him to be even a more hardened position, certainly at the outset as he enters into or contemplates his next steps in these 30-day ceasefire negotiations.
You just mentioned about Vladimir Putin wearing a military uniform. Do you see this as a message that he will continue this war despite all the odds?
I think given every opportunity, he will try to continue the war as long as it suits his best interests. But however, again, you know this better than I do. There have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of soldiers and certainly innocent Ukrainian civilians, but soldiers on both sides who've been killed in action and wounded. And of course, the atrocities that have been levied against Ukrainian civilians, innocent Ukrainian citizens. These are war criminal acts. And so Putin putting on this military uniform does not give him any credibility at all. He's a war criminal, but I do believe that he will strive to put the Russian military in the best possible position up until at the point where he will, I think, eventually agree to ceasefire negotiations and a ceasefire itself. But he's trying to keep Russian military on the offense as Ukraine digs in on the defense.
So you're confident that Vladimir Putin has no other choice but to agree with ceasefire proposal today or in the nearest future?
I think eventually he will, but it's going to take a continued strong position between President Trump and President Zelensky, as well as with European allies. President Trump met with the NATO Security General yesterday in the Oval Office, and they had a very clear message to not only our European allies, but to Putin, that there is very little daylight between the United States and NATO. That's significant. We need to keep that going. We need to keep that thought moving forward because, Daniel, once ceasefire negotiations or long-term, they're what I would call a phase two, long-term peace negotiations, they're going to get bumpy. Diplomacy is messy. There's nothing linear about it. And it's less about the process, but more about the results. And so I think that you're going to need to see a play for U.S. providing long-term commitment to, yes, military capabilities, intelligence support, but also economic sanctions against Russia that the United States is leading. And I think right now President Trump is leading very effectively. But that will need to continue through the weeks and the months and even into the next year or two to give those long-term security guarantees for President Zelensky and for Ukraine so that Russia never ever is able or would even contemplate invading Ukraine or any other Western country again.
From your perspective, for how long could this process of negotiations be in the place, be active? For how long, how much would take it to negotiate a ceasefire? How many months or even years?
I think for the immediate 30-day ceasefire, that is, I'm sure, several weeks into months. And then what I would call phase two into the long-term peace agreement, that's into months, perhaps early into 2026. The diplomacy behind this, it's not easy. As I mentioned earlier, diplomacy is messy. I've negotiated with the Russians. They can be hard. They can be, in my view, untrustworthy. They will lie and steal and cheat as much as they possibly can. But what will hold their feet to the fire is making sure that they see that there's no more gain for them, essentially from Putin's standpoint, militarily on the battlefield, but also economically and financially. I believe that is a significant card that the United States and a unified Ukraine holds, as those economic and financial cards that we have against Putin, because his economy is not in a very good position. You'll at some point, perhaps you'll see some discontent with the Russian people if they're starting to feel those economic, financial challenges that they felt, by the way, through decades, but even more so because of how much Putin has obligated to blood and treasure to this heinous attack, not only in 2022, but certainly all the way back to 2014.
Do you expect the U.S. to continue providing Ukraine with security assistance after the end or after the beginning of ceasefire?
I do, and I would advise President Trump not necessarily to keep what we call an open checkbook and so forth, but provide the necessary intelligence capabilities, intelligence sources, and to some degree, military capabilities that Europe and the NATO forces can't provide. The United States provides exquisite, what we call enablers. That is very capable air defense for Ukraine, not necessarily to be